Today, we will hear a review of The Library Book by Susan Orlean, which Booklist described as a mesmerizing, riveting mix of true crime, history, biography, and immersion journalism. Our presenter today is Catherine Nixon, former executive director of the Rundell Library Foundation, now FFRPL. Please join me in welcoming Kathy to our podium.
Thanks, Susan. And thank you to the Friends and the Foundation and John Rumsey for inviting me to review this library book, The Library Book. It's a fascinating read, especially for somebody who spent 17 years working at the library. So I know that I've spoken with a number of you in the audience today, and some of you have read the book, and it's just a real fun book. And a great cover, don't you think? Susan Orlean grew up in libraries. She went to the Bertram Woods branch of the Shaker Heights Public Library System for years with her mom and remembered it as the first place she was ever given autonomy. She was allowed to roam free, choose any of the books that she wanted to borrow, and as many as she wanted to borrow, and they would return to the library as soon as they'd read their pile of exquisite treasures, often more than once a week. The Orleans family was big on the library, believing you read a book for the experience, not in order to keep the book forever. They had very few books on the shelves in their home. As a young adult, off on her own, Orlean filled her shelves with as many books as possible and began to wonder, what are libraries for? But she says libraries came roaring back into her life when she moved to Los Angeles with her husband and son. Her first grade son was given the assignment of interviewing someone who worked for the city, and he insisted it be a librarian. His mom tried to talk him out of it. She said, no, why don't you do a fireman or somebody that's more interesting? He said, nope, I'm doing a librarian. So when they went on their first visit to the library, she said, the spell libraries once cast on me was renewed. I'm just going to read a little bit of what she talked about. So the spell libraries once cast on me was renewed. Maybe it had never really been extinguished, although I had been away long enough that it was like visiting a country I loved but forgotten as my life went galloping by. I knew what it was like to want a book and to buy it, but I had forgotten what it was like to amble among the library shelves, finding the book I was looking for, but also seeing who its neighbors were, noticing their peculiar concordance and following an idea as it was handed off from one book to the next, like a game of telephone. And I think many of us probably have experienced that same thing. This section truly resonated with me. In my 17 years with the Library Foundation, I always felt like I was working in a candy store. Not only the books, but the information and the hard work on the part of so many to make this a welcoming and pertinent institution. And I suspect because you're here today, most of you feel the same way. As she became more familiar with the Los Angeles library system, Orlean discovered there had been a catastrophic fire in the Central Library, and the seed was planted for the book. On April 29th, 1986, the Central Library in downtown Los Angeles caught fire and burned. Nobody died, but almost every firefighter in the city helped fight the inferno. The fire raged for more than 7 hours and reached temperatures of 2,500 degrees. In her wonderful prose, Orlean describes the fire as glowering angrily, feeding itself book after book like a monster snacking on chips. In that fire, more than 400,000 books and documents were destroyed, and 700,000 were damaged. Those damaged, many by water, as well as smoke and fire, were packed by 2,000 volunteers into box and frozen within 48 hours to keep mold from sprouting. They were stored in the generously offered freezers of local fish and produce packing plants. So they said it was in Los Angeles, they had the unusual ability to have these available. And they had all these packing plants, and they all just moved their vegetables and moved their produce over and moved the fish over and just let them put in all these thousands of boxes. They also put out a call the night of the library and said, we need volunteers. They were able to garner, I think it was, I don't know if anybody remembers that read this, but there were just tons of boxes and hard hats so that volunteers could come, and people, just like a fireman's kind of parade, they just handed the books off and packed them up and put them in the freezer. But lost was a volume of Don Quixote from 1860, illustrated by French printmaker Gustave Doré. All the books about the Bible, all the books about Christianity and church history, all biographies of subjects H through K, all American and British plays, all Shakespeare, all theater history, 90,000 books about computers, astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, seismology, engineering, and metallurgy. Gone were 5.5 million American patent listings dating from 1799 with drawings and descriptions. All Canadian patent material from the same period was lost. 45,000 works of literature by authors A through L, microfilm, art, books, and periodicals. I think you get the picture of the mass destruction. It was the greatest loss to any public library in the history of the United States. Having lived in New York City in 1986, at the time of the fire, Orlean had never heard of the fire. So she went and searched the New York Times headlines of April 30th, the day following the Inferno, to figure out why she had no knowledge of the disaster. The massive fire at the LA Library occurred on the same day as the nuclear reactor meltdown at Chernobyl, which also sent the stock market crashing. So you can understand why it was not on the headlines of any of the newspapers except the Los Angeles publications. So that what was the biggest library fire in US history was trivial news in other parts of the country. The New York Times only mentioned it the day after it had been extinguished in a small article on page A14. So Susan Orlean wrote the library book, but actually this is two books. One details the fire, the determination that it was an act of arson, and the arrest of a suspect. She spends a good deal of time convincing the reader that Harry Peake was the perpetrator of this crime. But in a roller coaster ride, by the end of the book, she proves, at least the thought occurs, that the fire was most likely not caused by arson. So it was kind of an interesting turn of event. The other book that she wrote, as part of the library book, is really about the history and present life of the Los Angeles Central Library. Much of the story consists of its authors wandering around a library building, watching and listening to the people inside of it. Although written about a much larger library system and its central anchor, this book could have been written about our own central library and the Rochester Public Library System. Our central library is also the central library for the entire Monroe County Library System. In comparison, our central library has a collection of 1 million items, about the same number of items destroyed or damaged in the Los Angeles fire. Los Angeles has 72 branch libraries. Rochester has 11 sites, central and 10 urban libraries, branch libraries. Our central answered 101,000 reference questions last year. LA Central answered 6 million. But the mission and the services remain the same. The library is the place people come for answers to their most pressing questions. The search has not been entirely replaced by the search engine. The author says, it seems simple to define what a library is. Namely, it is a storeroom of books. But the more time I spend at Central, the more I realize that a library is an intricate machine, a contraption of whirring gears. There were days when I came to the library and planted myself near the center of the main corridor and simply watched the whirl and throb of the place. Sometimes people ambled by with no apparent destination. Some people marched crisply, full of purpose. Many were alone, some were in pairs. Occasionally they traveled in a gaggle. People think that libraries are quiet, but they really aren't. They rumble with voices and footsteps and a whole orchestral range of book-related noises. The snap of covers clapping shut, a breathy whisk of papers fanning open, the distinctive thunk of one book being stacked on another, and the grumble of book carts in the corridor. One recent morning before dawn, I did hear the library in complete silence. I had come to see the shipping department, which opens at 5. So I want to talk about our shipping department. When I came to work at Central, I was always intrigued by the shipping and the catalog departments. In many ways, they allow us to have a library system. In 2018, Central Shipping Department delivered 3.5 million items to the libraries throughout Monroe County, including every town and city library. Many of these items live on the shelves of the Central Library, and the others are in transit through Central's hub system. If somebody in Greece wants to get a book that's not in the Greece library, they put a request online, and the book is taken off the shelf at Central. It is then shipped to Greece, and the patron has the book. If they want a book that possibly lives in Pittsburgh, then the book is transferred from Pittsburgh to Central, and then again from Central out to Greece. So that whole system works really simply, but yet very carefully, because as soon as there are mistakes, it really screws up the whole system, as you can imagine. I'm sure most of you have used this system, and I've always been amazed at the efficiency that allows me easy access to the collections of all libraries in Monroe County. As a quick aside, I think many of you probably knew or knew of Herold Hacker, who was a longtime library director here. And one of his favorite tales was the fact that he instituted the ability for patrons to return their library books to any library in the system. So you still had to take your library book out from the library, from its home library, but after you finished with it, you could return it to any library. Now, that doesn't sound like much to us, but in those days, that was probably as creative a move as some of the technological moves that are and changes that are being made now. So that was just a favorite story of his, and it was just wonderful, because when you think about it, that really did start the ability to have a library system that worked. I think that he did recall that one of the librarians said to him, that's going to make it easier for people to use libraries. And he said, yes, it really is. When I first toured the catalog department, and I don't have a picture of the catalog department, but I think you can see the picture of the shipping, and it's kind of fun, with all the totes, and they're all labeled with the different libraries. And as I say, it's a simple system, but it works just really well. When I first toured the catalog department, it was hard to fathom the detailed work critical to making sure each title or replacement book was added to the catalog correctly. If the book is a replacement book or an additional copy, it's real easy. The librarians just put it into the system with very little work. But when a new title arrives, especially one with very little information, the cataloging librarians must painstakingly write a description of the book, and then the books are wrapped in their protective mylar covers and sent on their way to the appropriate division or library in the system. Orleans talks about how libraries keep expanding their services to be inclusive to as many residents as possible, and that's true here as well. An example in Rochester is the response to what was once a population with no home in the library. After some years of inappropriate behavior by teens and no real place for them to hang out together, make some noise, and be engaged, Rochester Public Library smartly initiated the Safe to Be Smart program for youth ages 13 to 19. And Derek Coley is here. He's the director of the Safe to Be Smart program. Give a wave. He's my hero in many ways. He's done a remarkable job with a population that's sometimes tough to deal with. Safe to Be Smart is located in 6 libraries. 5 sites are in branch libraries, and the largest is Teen Central on the 2nd floor of this building with its Imagine You lab. Teens can use, excuse me, teens can use recording, I better do this. By the way, I think people are allowed to go up and take a look at it, aren't they, Derek? Okay. He's going to give a tour right after if anybody wants one. Teens can use recording and video equipment. They can learn photography, computer skills, coding classes, all the time working with adults who are mentoring them to stay on track with school and life goals. Of course, they can read books. Have any of you read a graphic novel? All right. So that first time I was introduced to them was in the teen area, so I think they're pretty fun. The library system also offers an online magazine for budding authors to submit their works. Central Library provides sewing machines and ukuleles to be borrowed. Who would have guessed? Is there really a demand for ukuleles? There is, huh, Patty? Okay. You can borrow Empire passes for free entry to New York State parks. And I think there's more things listed up there. What is a Go Chip Bean movie? It was on the list, and I don't know what it is. Anybody here know what it is?
It's a small device that
Yeah?
that functions as a Wi-Fi storage device that holds up to 5 full movies or a full season of a TV series that lets you broadcast that series or those movies to up to 7 devices within 75 minutes. It's a really good thing to take when you're traveling. You've got 6 in the back seat, you can set it up so they can see a different movie on an iPad or a phone or other type of device.
Okay, there you go. Did people hear her all right? Because if you didn't, we can have her come up and use the microphone later and explain it better, but that sounds cool. I'll have to get that for my grandchildren. The Art and Recreation Division has for years loaned framed prints. What a great way to change the decor of an office or a home. In recent years, a donor who believed in the importance of supporting local artists gave us a number of grants to purchase prints by local artists, which really expanded the collection. And then a group of local artists, hearing this, donated prints of their works, so the collection became much more rich and diverse. Central and many of the branch libraries provide tax preparation services. I don't know if you saw the sign when you come in, but it said cash program. So a few weeks ago, I walked down through the link, and people were helping folks do taxes, but there was no line. Well, then as it got closer and closer to tax time, every time I would go through the link, the lines were getting longer and longer. I'm sure today they're pretty ugly, but it's just a wonderful service, and it's here at the Central Library, but also some of the branches as well. The Business Division and Small Business Administration provide First Wednesdays with advice and guides to prospective or current small business owners on how to open a business or make a current one more successful. And that's been a real boon for small business owners. It really has been very, very popular and very successful. The Chester Carlson Patent and Trademark Center saves inventors and creators hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars by walking them through the search process of current patents. The Patent Center was named to honor Chester Carlson, the inventor of xerography, by Catherine Carlson. Chester did much of his work on xerography at the New York Public Library and really struggled to have a company adopt his technology. If you've ever read the history of xerography, it took him years to get anybody to adopt it. Catherine felt that the service to all up-and-coming inventors was appropriate to be housed here at Central, and was happy to name that after Chester. The Grant Center helps small not-for-profits search for available grants with library subscribed software, which is pretty expensive software, and only large universities pretty much are able to afford it. When I was the director of the foundation here at the library, I often used it, and it was a valuable source of funding leads. The Local History Division has rare and fascinating material, including plat maps and lists of people who lived in different houses, so you can go and find out who lived possibly in your older home in the city for for many, many years, and you can find out what the person did as a profession and who the family members, and I see people nodding, so it's really interesting. And it's always fun to see folks come from all over the country and sometimes other places in this world with their rollerboards full of papers, and they come up and they camp out in that Local History Division, and they spend a week sometimes more there, doing all their genealogical and historical research. So it's just a wonderful asset. Our branches are truly neighborhood libraries, each serving the different needs of the population. The toy library at the Lincoln branch offers not only toys to play with, but also hands-on demonstrations to teach adults how to play with children. It's really fun. Have any of you been there? A few, okay. It's really a fun place to go to, and it's really fun because not only are there just shelves and shelves of toys, but there's all these kids playing with these toys. And it's a real boom for home daycare providers. So if you've got a bunch of kids coming to your house every day and you want to shake it up every 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, you can come in and exchange the toys. But kids are playing with these toys in the toy library, and there are demonstrations. The staff there helps parents and helps guardians know how to play with kids, because that's not always a natural thing, especially if you weren't played with. So they're doing really important work. And adding to the fun are the play and learn backpacks on many different topics. So kids and parents can grab a backpack and have a day or a week-long experience about specific topics, including animals and stars and cars and plants and colors and all sorts of fun things. And speaking of play, Central oversees the library at the Strong Museum of Play. When I'm visiting with my grandkids, we often take a break and read one of the books that are spread throughout the museum in places that are appropriate to the book themes, or maybe I guess the books are placed in appropriate play themes, areas. But anyhow, people can return books, any books, sort of like Herold Hacker set up. They can return books to that branch, and they can also take books out from there. So it's a nice small branch. One branch library has a seed library, and another has a community garden. One branch near Lake Ontario loans fishing poles. The Lincoln Branch Library has a large collection of materials in Spanish to serve the needs of the Joseph Avenue neighborhood. There are Ukrainian collections and other collections for immigrants in their native languages at different branch libraries. And to meet the demands of digital audio materials, the library has an app called Libby. So who here has the Libby app? Oh, come on, more, no? Oh, this is great. You want Libby app on your phone. You really do, or on one of your devices. I bought a car in 2018, and much to my horror, it did not have a CD player. So this, and I'm sure maybe some of you have experienced this as well, and that's what catapulted me into getting Libby on my phone and my iPad. Now I can download an audiobook and hook it through my Bluetooth and play it on my phone. So it's just I play it in my car, on the speaker of my car. And we do this all the time when we travel. I do it on all sorts of trips. And the nice thing is it's on my phone, so when I'm done playing it in the car, I can then take it into my kitchen, and when I'm cooking, I can continue playing the book rather than having a CD that I have to say, oh, what was I on, what chapter was I on, and so forth. And it's a wonderful app, and I highly recommend. It's similar, I think it's an extension of Overdrive, and maybe some of you have Overdrive, but I highly recommend it. It's just a wonderful app. And you can also put books on hold, and then they automatically download when they're available. So I also was on Libby last night checking it out. They're now offering 250 magazine titles, which is very cool. So, and it's not just audiobooks. That's how I mostly use it, but my daughter uses it mostly for just reading books. As Early On notes, one of the few places homeless people are welcomed, given access to computers and the internet, and permitted to spend their day is a public library. Libraries assist those who are homeless and underserved as efficiently and helpfully as they serve all others. Our central library now has Nurse Barb, who comes in several times a week as a volunteer to do health checks, such as blood pressure and blood sugar screenings. I've been told that Nurse Barb has identified some serious situations and has been able to refer folks to get medical treatment. Central has worked with the University of Rochester to have both the mobile mammography and the mobile dental units to come on a monthly basis. And Central also has the Library Resource Outreach Center to hook folks up immediately with social services, psychiatric services, and other help that's needed. And this program is run by volunteers from numerous agencies in town. Now, more than ever, our libraries are gathering places. The programming at our central branch and town libraries has expanded to adapt to the world as it is now. Presentations, discussions, and workshops on any imaginable topics are now available thanks especially to the Friends and Foundation. The Stonewall exhibit honoring the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots is currently on display across the street in the Rundle building. And this exhibit might not have been presented 30 years ago, just as the recent exhibit on women's suffrage would probably not have been very popular when the library first opened in 1911. In times of trouble, libraries are sanctuaries. In Rochester, the libraries are designated as cool spots. Is that the correct term? Is that the correct term? It is, okay. The libraries are designated as cool spots when the weather heats up in the summer above 90 degrees, I believe. Okay. The air-conditioned libraries are open extra hours and even extra days to offer cool, comfortable, and safe places for residents without access to air conditioning. And I'm sure as you've read about many of the disasters throughout this country, libraries in cities are often the only place residents can go to charge their phones and use the internet when they've lost power and lost access to communication with family and friends. And libraries are as popular as ever, which I think is always a surprise to many. I remember having just started at the library, and we were working on raising money to build this building. And I remember meeting with some of the donors or prospective donors, and I said, why are you raising money to build a new library building? Libraries are going to be obsolete in 10 years. And I wasn't convinced. I was brand new to the library. And the more I heard from folks, the more I began to believe that libraries were not going to be obsolete, and it certainly has proven to be true here. According to a 2010 study, almost 300 million Americans use one of the country's 17,078 public libraries and bookmobiles in the course of that year. In another study, over 90% of those surveyed said closing their local library would hurt their communities. Public libraries in the United States outnumber McDonald's. I know. They outnumber retail bookstores 2-1, and in many towns, the library is the only place you can browse through physical books. Libraries are old-fashioned, but they are growing more popular with people under 30. The younger generation uses libraries in greater numbers than older Americans do, which I was rather shocked to read. And even though they grew up in this streaming digital world, almost 2/3 of them believe that there is important material in libraries that is not available on the internet. So, unlike older generations, people under 30 are also likely to have not to have office jobs. Consequently, they're also always looking for pleasant places to work outside their homes. Many end up in coffee shops and hotel lobbies, or joining the booming business of co-working spaces. Some of them are also discovering that libraries are society's original co-working spaces and have the distinct advantage of being free. Orlean includes entertaining descriptions in her book of the legion of library directors and librarians who have run the show in Los Angeles since the 1880s, many who were quite eccentric, some were very colorful, and most quite creative. The current director is John Szabo, who was hired away from the Atlanta Library because, and I will read a little bit about him, because he had developed a reputation in the library world as being one of the few directors who was figuring out the transition from pre-internet to omnipresent internet, and who was successfully rigging the library to sail into the future, not as a gigantic, groaning, futzy pile of books, but as a sleek ship of information and imagination. Szabo reckoned that the future of libraries was a combination of people's university, a community hub, an information base, happily partnered with the internet rather than its competition. In practical terms, Szabo felt the library should be offering classes and voter registration and literacy programs and story time and speaker series and homeless outreach and business services and computer access and movie rentals and ebook loans and a nice gift shop and, oh yes, also books. Our exceptionally creative director, Patty Utaro, knows she's the same sort of library director as John Szabo, and she knows it's up to our library leaders and staff to make sure libraries remain essential to our communities. They are information and knowledge centers rather than storehouses of materials. And if you want to know what happened to the more than 700,000 books that were damaged, that story is fascinating as well, so you'll have to read the book. It involves McDonnell Douglas space simulation chambers, vacuum chambers. I'm not going to reveal all the details, but it's really a fun read. This book is a delight, and I highly recommend it.